Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 28. A Home, Not Just a House. Izuku was incredibly nervous and seriously contemplating whether or not he was going to have to get a second burner phone so he could give Shinso his number. It's not like he could just give him Ivy's number. What if that phone gets taken and then Ivy gets traced back to Shinso or something equally catastrophic? And it's not like he can just say, I don't have a phone. Shinso's seen him using it, but that one only works when it's connected to Wi-Fi, and he's not about to try to explain to Shinso why he has a phone but not a service plan. There was no non-concerning way to explain that. The best case scenario is that Shinso would just think he's dirt poor, which is true, but he didn't want his concern or pity or, God forbid, any follow-up questions. Gah! Having a friend shouldn't be this stressful. It was Wednesday, and now he was potentially going to Shinso's house that evening. And what if he lives in an area Izuku's never been to? He's going to have to look up directions in the library before he leaves. And then, what if Shinso sees that? And then he has to explain away why he can't just use the GPS on his phone. And what if he can't find his house? Or he gets lost and Shinso just thinks he ditched him? What if his mom is the type of person who insists on picking him up or won't let him come over without meeting his mom first? How's he supposed to explain he doesn't have a mom to meet anymore? Kami, he should have just kept his mouth shut and never talked to Shinso to begin with. There was no way this wasn't going to end with questions he didn't have answers to at the very least, and complete catastrophic disaster at worst. And knowing his luck, it was going to lean toward the latter. Standing at the front doors of the library, a large part of him was yelling that he should just leave and never come back and save himself from the inevitable mess this was about to become. But he didn't have the heart to just stand Shinso up like that. Izuku had been on the receiving end of that kind of treatment too many times when the kids at school used to ask to hang out with him as a joke and then never show up. Eventually, he got wise to that trick, so nowadays they fall back to the good old reliable method of just beating the crap out of him whenever they can. Wait, what if that's what Shinso was doing now? What if he's found out he's a null and he was just messing with him? What if he was planning on giving him a fake address just so he could laugh at him the next time he showed up at the library? Kami, he needed to pull himself together. Whatever happens, it won't be the end of the world. They won't be at school, so even if Shinso does lead him to a fake address to beat him up, he'll be able to fight back, and in any other worst case scenario, this would just be the inevitable end of a good thing. He just needs to rip the Band-Aid off. Walking into the library, he didn't see Shinso-san at the front desk, so he figured she must be reshelving books somewhere. That's probably for the best. There's no way she wouldn't have felt his mini meltdown from such a close range. When he went back to the computer room, Shinso was in his usual spot, but his mom was there too. Oh no, she was going to be one of those I want to meet your mom moms, wasn't she? Hey, kiddo, she greeted him, cheerful as ever. Oh, hi, Shinso-san, he called back with a wave. Shinso was sitting at the computer looking rather embarrassed as he greeted him with a nod. Toshi says you're going to want to come over to our house and beat him up out back, she said, just as cheerily as she greeted him seconds prior. Shinso buried his face in his hands, and all Izuku could do was sputter out sounds that had far too many consonants to be anywhere close to being considered words. Shinso-san burst out laughing at the reactions and tousled her son's hair affectionately. I'm just messing with you two. She paused to laugh again. I'm fine with it as long as you don't end up maiming each other. But I know Toshi couldn't hurt a fly, even if he wanted to. And you seem responsible enough to not send him to the hospital. Are you going to stay for dinner? I was planning on Katsudan. Is that okay? Izuku was still a little shell-shocked and ended up spitting up a few more non-word sounds before he could form a coherent response. Yeah, I've never had Katsudan, but I'm not picky. Thank you, Shinso-san. Oh, it's no problem, kid. I always end up making too much anyway, she said with a sad smile. Are you going to need a ride? He quickly denied the offer. Oh, no, Shinso-san. Thank you, though. All right. Toshi said we should expect you around 4, right? She asked. Uh, I, uh, I, I don't know. It depends. I don't know where you live, so I don't know how long it will take me to get there. He answered honestly. Toshi! She exclaimed as she playfully whacked the back of his head. You never gave him our address? I was about to, if you'd quit talking. He shot back with no heat. We live a little less than a half hour's walk from here, or a 10-minute train ride. So I figured it was safe to say you'd be there by 4. He said as he scribbled down an address on a slip of paper and handed it to him. Luckily, Izuku knew the area. Unluckily, it was the neighborhood just past Kachan's. He'd have to watch and see if he took the train or walked home today so that he could do the opposite in order to avoid him. Yeah, I know the neighborhood. I should be there by 4, he confirmed. Great. Well, we'll see you then, she said as she turned to go back to whatever she'd been doing before he arrived. Shinso waited a moment until he was sure that she was out of earshot before speaking up. I, I might have told her you've been taking lessons for a long time, so she would let you teach me, he said sheepishly. I didn't think she'd agree to let us spar if both of us had no clue what we're doing. Izuku couldn't help but snort at that. That was probably a good call. This does seem like an exceptionally stupid plan when you say it like that. He responded under his breath so that there was no way Shinso-san could overhear it. Shinso let out a genuine laugh at that. Right. So far, so good. Maybe this wouldn't be a catastrophe. Maybe. By the time school let out, it was lightly raining, so Izuku figured that Kachan would take the train home. His suspicions were confirmed when he saw him walk briskly out the gate with an umbrella in the direction of the station. The rain really wasn't too bad, so walking should be fine. Walking was not fine. It started pouring halfway through the walk, and Izuku looked and felt like a dog that had just been dunked in a swimming pool. Hopefully the Shinsos had a patio with an awning or something, because he doubted Shinso would want to have their first lesson in the pouring rain. Kami, he was about to show up to the Shinso's house for the first time, looking like a drowned dog and shaking like a chihuahua to boot. It wasn't exactly a first impression, but it felt like a bad one anyway. He'd been shielding his bag on his chest and walking hunched forward, so he was hoping that the spare set of clothes he always carried wouldn't be too wet. He didn't know what he would do if those were soaked too. Though, if those were soaked, then that would mean his notebooks would be soaked too, and he would be more worried about that anyway. He made the walk in good time, since he was power walking fast enough to rival Ingenium in an attempt to get out of the rain as quickly as possible. It was a nice house. It wasn't as big or as extravagant as the Bakugos, but it was a standalone house, which was pretty rare in the city, even if they were on the outskirts at this point. There was a small lawn in the front and a fenced-in backyard that he couldn't really see into. Hopefully, some of it was shielded from the rain. He stood at the front door, checking that it was the right address about 50 times before he worked up the courage to knock. After a few tense moments of waiting, the door opened to reveal Shinso, whose smile quickly fell after giving Izuku a once-over. "You're soaked. Do you not have an umbrella? Get in here," he said quickly, beckoning him inside. "No, I don't. Sorry," he replied as he stood dripping water all over the Genkan. "Stay here. I'll go grab you a towel," Shinso said, already halfway down the hall. Izuku just watched the puddle of water accumulating on the floor beneath him, feeling supremely awkward until Shinso returned. "I can grab you some spare clothes, and we can throw that stuff in the dryer, but let's make sure you're not tracking water everywhere first," he said as he handed him the towel. "It's fine. I have a change of clothes that hopefully aren't too wet." Shinso's hand brushed his as he passed off the towel. "No way, dude, you're freezing. We're not letting you sit around in damp clothes and catch a cold. Are you shaking?" Shinso said as he got a better look at him. Just then, Shinso's mom walked around the corner. "What's taking you so long? Are you going to let him through the door, Toshi?" she asked, not seeing the state he was in since Shinso was standing between them. In response, he simply stepped out of the way and gestured. "Oh my goodness, you're shaking. You must be so cold. Toshi, go get him some dry clothes and warm up the shower," she said, already taking his bag and holding a hand out for the gakuren he was almost done unbuttoning with his shaky, uncooperative fingers. "It's fine, Shitsu-san. I don't need the shower," he tried to deny. "Like hell you don't. I'm not sending you home with a cold," she snapped back, leaving no room for argument. Izuku simply shut his mouth, handed over his jacket, and toed off his shoes and socks, and tried to dry himself enough to not drip all over the floor on the way to wherever the bathroom was. Shinso-san gathered up his shoes and socks along with his jacket. "I'll throw these in the wash. The shoes should be fine, right? I throw mine and Toshi's shoes in there from time to time, and I've never had an issue. Is that all right with you? They look like they could use a wash anyway," she quipped amicably. You don't have to do that. They can just air dry. It's fine." She cut him off with a raised hand. "I'm at least washing your clothes. I might as well throw the shoes in. These definitely won't air dry by the time you leave anyway." Again, her tone left no room for argument. She turned on her heel, presumably toward the laundry room, and over her shoulder she said, "Toshi will show you the bathroom and grab the rest of your clothes. Do you want to throw your backpack in too?" No, that's okay. Thank you, Shinso-san." He heard her reply with a non-committal before she rounded the corner, and he was left once again to stare at the much more slowly accumulating puddle beneath him. He might as well use the towel to mop up as much as he could, right? Shinso came back as he was shuffling his feet around on top of the towel, trying to dry the floor as best he could. It wasn't working very well, and Shinso seemed to notice that, as evidenced by the small chuckle he let out at the sight. "I can get that. Let me show you to the bathroom. There's a change of clothes in there already. Come on," he said, gesturing him forward. "Just leave that there," he added when Izuku shot a concerned glance at the towel on the floor. "Kami, they were so nice, and he was so awkward." "Sorry about all this," he said as he followed Shinso around the corner and up a set of stairs. "It's fine." "Midoriya, why didn't you just take the train?" he asked. I forgot my pass," he lied. "We really should have checked the weather beforehand. My mom says we weren't allowed any hooliganery in the house, So we're not even going to be able to do anything today, Shinso said apologetically. That's okay, he quickly placated as Shinso held open a door to what he assumed was the bathroom, given the sound of running water and the steam already billowing out of the open door. You might want to turn the heat down a little. I cranked it so it would heat up faster. Toss your clothes by the door and I'll grab them once you get in the shower. Okay, thanks, Shinso. The heat was so heavenly that he almost forgot to tell Shinso he could grab his clothes once he closed the curtain. He was always in and out of the shower at school before it properly heated up, just in case someone came in and caught him showering in the locker room an hour before school started. That would prompt questions he didn't have answers to, or just get him beat up, depending on who wandered in. The warm water washed over him and soothed muscles he didn't even know were tense. He'd just taken a shower yesterday, but they had conditioner, and Izuku just couldn't resist. It had been nearly 2 years since he'd used conditioner, and it had been nearly as long since he'd been able to wash his hair with anything besides bar soap. This was a luxury he was too weak to pass up. He lathered and rinsed his hair and stood basking in the heat and letting the conditioner soak in for as long as he thought he could reasonably get away with before he rinsed it out and turned off the faucet. He got out and dried himself off with the fluffiest towel he could ever remember touching, then donned the sweatpants and t-shirt Shinso had left for him. They were far too big, and he had to pull the drawstring tight in order to keep them from falling right off. Towel in hand, he followed the sound of voices downstairs, where he found both the Shinsos in the kitchen, bickering as Shinso-san made her son chop vegetables. He stopped at the sight. It was so nice and domestic. Those two clearly loved each other, and it filled the whole house with this inexplicable warmth. He couldn't remember his home ever feeling like this, even before he was diagnosed quirkless. He felt like an intruder stomping into somewhere he had no right to be. He stood at the edge of the kitchen awkwardly, clutching the towel he didn't know where to put for a moment before Shinso-san noticed him. Hey, kid. Oh, you can drop that in the laundry room. First door down the hall to your left, she said, before returning to the task of prepping dinner. Izuku followed her instructions, and as he was looking for the best place to place the towel, he noticed his hands were shaking again, but not because of the cold. No, it was because of the warmth. It was so foreign. It was so lovely. It was something he didn't deserve, and something he would become addicted to if he didn't watch himself. Kami, he was pathetic. He needed to pull himself together. When he returned, Shinso was freed from his task of chopping vegetables so that he could entertain their guest. He sat at the table as Shinso set out glasses, napkins, and chopsticks, while repeatedly refusing Izuku's offers to assist. After he finished that, he led him to the living room and sat down on the couch, promptly sticking a controller in Izuku's hands, which he eyed with a confused expression. You never played Nintendo? Shinso asked in response to his confusion. No, he replied. He knew what it was, but he doesn't remember ever having seen one in person. You never played Nintendo? Shinso repeated in disbelief. Izuku just shook his head. Oh, well, that's got to change immediately. We're playing Mario Kart right frickin' now, he said, grabbing his own controller and pulling up the game on the TV. He couldn't recall how many rounds they played before Shinso-san called them for dinner, but he did know he never placed higher than 8th. But Kami, it was so fun anyway. He threw a blue shell at Shinso at least once per round, and his increasingly ridiculous expletives had Izuku laughing so hard he feared he would choke himself. That warmth he felt walking downstairs hadn't dissipated when Shinso-san noticed him, nor did it when they left her to prepare dinner, and as they all sat down together, he realized that it wasn't going to. They weren't shunning him. They didn't stop their playful bickering because he was there, and their mood wasn't going to sour because of his presence. This home was warm and happy, and he was a part of it for however long they would allow him. It was something he didn't know he was missing until all of a sudden it opened a gaping hole in his chest and took his breath away. He was sitting at a dinner table with people who wanted him to be there, and there was a warm meal that was made by hand for him, and his hair was all fluffy and dry and 10 times curlier than it normally was, and he wasn't alone, and the floor wasn't cold and damp, and Shinso-san was looking at him with a concerned expression. Damn it. He shoved all that down as quickly as possible. Thank you for dinner, Shinso-san, he said with a bow. Oh, none of that. It's no problem, she replied, her worried expression gone for now. He waited for the other two to start eating before he picked up his chopsticks and followed suit. Oh, sweet Kami, it was delicious. Maybe it was because it's the only even vaguely warm food he'd had in nearly a year was cafeteria food, but that was baked with hate by Anzi-san, the lunch lady at school, who must have owed a favor to the janitor because despite her clear disdain for Izuku, she kept bringing his lukewarm lunch to the back door of the kitchen. So the other students didn't have the chance to slap it out of his hands. Or maybe it was just that good. He honestly couldn't remember the last time he had something this delicious and had to stop himself from gobbling the whole bowl down quicker than he could chew. I'll take the quiet as a compliment, Shinso said with a giggle. Oh, Kami, he hadn't said a word since he sat down, had he? It was just so good that he was so entranced. He nodded vigorously with a mouth full of pork. Yes, it's delicious, Shinso-san. What did you say this was? He asked again once he'd finished chewing. She looked at him with a fond smile that filled him with that same warmth that filled the house before responding, Katsudan. He had no idea how he was ever going to get his hands on this again, but he vowed that he would. It was so freaking good. Nodding, he committed the dish's name to memory before stuffing his face again. Shinso-san giggled at his antics. It's not going anywhere, kid. You can slow down. Do you want to take the leftovers home? It's not enough for a full meal, but it's a good snack size, she asked. Apparently, Izuku's hesitation and full mouth were enough of an answer for her because she chuckled and told him she'd pack the rest in a Tupperware for him before he could argue. When dinner was done, Izuku had managed to eat a little over half his bowl before he felt full enough to vom, but Shinso-san just added the rest of his bowl to the Tupperware and handed it back to him. If his stomach capacity was small enough to concern her, she didn't let it show. Izuku insisted on helping with the dishes before Shinso and him went back to the living room so he could get his ass kicked in Mario Kart a few more times. Leaving was the last thing he wanted to do, but it was nearly 7 and the sun was bound to start setting soon. He'd already had to cancel his pre-patrol training with Eraser for this, so he couldn't show up late for actual patrol. He wouldn't live that down after poking fun at Eraser for being late the first time. Reluctantly, he bid the Shinsos goodbye. The rain had long since stopped falling, and his clothes were fresh out of the dryer. Donning them felt like he could take a little bit of the warmth from that night with him, but it faded all too quickly as he walked away in the brisk spring air. End of chapter.